So, Alex, developers often tell me that Stripe has one of the best APIs out there. What does that mean to you from an internal engineering point of view?
Yeah, I mean, from an internal engineering perspective, I think we think of it as like really a couple of different pillars. One is like the reliability of how a user can depend on that API. Part of it is just the design of how we take some of the complex interactions of payments and different parts of Stripe and expose that to users. And for our internal developers, like how they're able to do that in a way that's scalable and allows them to focus on their ability to do business logic and focus on sort of the unique product offering they're building versus sort of the basic building blocks of just getting the API out the door. So yeah.
So you mentioned reliability as one of those key pillars. How do you do that under the hood? Like, what's some of the infrastructure that Stripe's building to make that so reliable?
Yeah, I mean, we aim for something better than 5 nines of availability, and the reality is that takes intention and effort. Some of the things we do are really taking a lot of care around incidents and thinking about what is the process for, nobody's perfect. We do make mistakes. We try to make those mistakes small and make sure that, if there's a problem, like how do we retro that problem? How do we ensure we rectify it and mitigate it as quickly as possible? How do we roll it back? And we spend a lot of time thinking about that process and holding ourselves accountable for issues that do rise. And then before we even get to the design process, get to the actual incident process, like what are the different scenarios that a team needs to be thinking about? How do we make sure that they've prepared and planned for scaling their API up? Done best practices around storing data in a way that scales for their use case. So we have processes like service reliability review and engineering reviews and ways that sort of, that aren't meant to impede a team from launching, but make sure that you're going to launch something at Stripe scale. Like, have you thought about some of these edge cases and things that, may not have been top of mind at the very earliest part of the design process, but we think are important to deliver that sort of experience that we want for users.
You mentioned, was it 5 nines?
5 nines, yeah.
Do you have a nice analogy of how often that means something can go wrong?
Yes. We actually aim for better if we can get there, but 5 nines is 5 minutes of downtime a year,
right?
Total. And so I like to think of it as like even a blip is something that, it's like, well, that's something we have to monitor really closely. So, it takes a big part of what do we look at from our metrics to be like, oh, hey, this may be drifting a little lower. Think about it this way. If it's January and you've used up 30 seconds of your budget, you're already in a case where you're thinking like, wow, we may need to be preparing to improve our reliability or improve some of these things that may be going wrong because you just don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, a whole other metric to kind of track and balance out.
It's not just you've missed the 5 minutes. It's like you've missed 10 seconds. Okay, well that's a big chunk of your 5 minutes. How are you thinking about that? You really have to be on top of it from the very beginning of the year.
And you've worked on API v2, right?
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what is API v2 and why Stripe has
well, the first namespace for API, like /v1 that everybody's used, has existed and given us a lot of mileage. There's a lot of core primitives that our users use. And one of the things we take really seriously is the sort of contract we have with users, the expectations they have of interacting with Stripe's API, the assumptions they make about the developer experience.
What are some of those assumptions that they're making?
Some of them are really basic, like the way you call the API, the way a map field might be returned, the way you might, set a reference between different objects in our API. These are sort of get to become inbuilt assumptions into how a user integrates. And we realized there were some of those that we wanted to change. We wanted to make changes to, for example, the way idempotency works, which is, being able to call our API and making sure that if you call it twice, it doesn't do the same action, which is really important for payments. You don't want to record the same payment twice.
Or that it just returns the same result.
Yeah, it returns the same result. And so some of those things we think, Stripe is at a different scale than it was. And some of those things we thought, based on user feedback and our own sort of internal scalability decisions, like we wanted to change. We felt like it was important to sort of keep the existing expectations where they were, so that a user who's integrated with Stripe 10 years ago can keep, creating payments, create customers, and create this new API v2 area where we could go change some of those assumptions. So for example, we do JSON and support some more modern ways of dealing with, some of those API semantics. And this new namespace allowed us to introduce these new APIs without breaking those assumptions. And for many of our product teams, we have some API primitives like customer. It's been around for a really long time. Load bearing for many of our users' integrations, really critical. And changing that can be quite hard. So we wanted to give a place where our product teams could sort of evolve something even as fundamental as an account or a customer or how a payment is made. And sort of launch that new model for how to do that while maintaining and still iterating on sort of that existing contract with users.
So API v2 has a new model for different objects?
It's a little bit of column A and column B. It is both a platform and contract with users. So, the new semantics exist in v2. You can know if I'm calling a v2 API, this is how it'll behave from an idempotency standpoint versus v1. And then yes, it has, many of our teams are starting to launch new models for how to do. We've recently had like the accounts v2 private or public preview. We've recently launched global payouts in the new namespace. And so some of our new products are launching in that area and giving them some space to make more fundamental tweaks and changes to how the actual API interaction occurs.
So let's take accounts v2, for example, like a newer model for account objects. How does that help customers or developers?
Yeah, when we look at accounts v2, one of the things we realized is, if I look at our v1 API, we have actually multiple ways to represent a user of one of our users. We have a customer, we have a connected account, et cetera. And so one of the goals of accounts v2 was, well, it would actually help our users if they could have a single way to represent their users on Stripe. And that's a pretty big change to make. I mean, we have users who have integrated with some of these primitives, and it's not that they can never move, but it takes effort, and we wanted to give the space to launch this new functionality for new users and a way for existing users to move at their own pace. And so, with Accounts v2, you can now have one single identity to represent one of your users, and then progressively give them new capabilities, like I want to connect with them, I want to treat them as a customer, et cetera.
Okay, and you mentioned idempotency as well. I know there's some new kind of nuances about how...
One of the things we heard from customers is, we do have idempotency in our API v1, but it has some sharp edges, particularly in that it was a little too short of a time window. It's 24 hours, and then the idempotency data would go away. So in v2, we do something we call roll forward idempotency, where if you make a call and it fails, you can make that call with that key again, and we'll both try to complete finish the operation, or and return you data over both like a longer window. So instead of 24 hours, most of our API calls have a 30-day idempotency window, which is something that's, and some even longer, which is a really important feature for when you're working with, something like even payments that can take a little longer to resolve, or that you may want to retry pretty aggressively.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about how you make Stripe APIs not only global, but super fast.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit to some of the architecture, maybe, on how you're achieving that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, one of the things that has shifted some is with API v2, we actually use a little bit of a different architecture than most of our v1 APIs.
Oh, right.
To think about that, in some of our existing architecture, we have a pretty monolithic, like Mini, it's an API that's been around for a while, and so we have a relatively monolithic API, and a lot of effort and intention has gone into like, how do you scale that up in a performant way? We have a core part of our foundations and infrastructure thinking about optimizing our database layer, thinking about the way we shard our data, especially with Stripe. Like if you are a user using Stripe, we want to make sure that if somebody is overloading their account, you have you're not impacted, and we want to make sure those scale in a very independent way. And so a lot of effort goes into database layout and optimizations, and some basic stuff like rate limiting. Like how do we treat, how do we ensure that there are no what we call noisy neighbors, where some account that is using a large number of resources is not impacting you. For API v2, we sort of shifted gears a little bit. We're now using a little bit more of a microservice-based architecture, using pretty common technologies, things like gRPC and protobuf, to allow services to expose APIs through an API gateway and out to the world. And we make that scalable in very similar ways. We think about data sharding. We think about game days and making sure that you've thought about how to scale up your service for your traffic, et cetera.
Okay, so given the new design of API v2, maybe is it more performant?
Yeah, it certainly can be. I think one of the things that we think a little bit about, we've recently launched, or I say recently, a couple months ago, have the usage-based billing. Yeah. And one of the functionalities that we did launch was the ability to ultra high throughput metered usage data.
Right.
And that was something we built using some of the modularity and technology we built for our V2 platform. So something like, hey, we wanted to be able to take our API translation layer out of the monolith and be able to run it in a way that allowed for a user to send 100,000 requests a second to, or meter usage at very high scale. That's definitely something that our architecture gives us more flexibility on, and something that we did hear from teams. Like, of course, we try to optimize and make it so any API is performant. But for some teams, it's of extreme importance, and we want to make sure they have the flexibility at the platform level to tackle that. And it's something that's a little more possible, or is definitely more possible with our V2.
So if you could speak to a customer, if I was a customer in front of you right now, yeah, and you were giving a short, succinct, single, good reason why I as a customer should make the effort to migrate to V2, what would you tell me? Why should I do it?
I mean, I would tell you, look, this is where some of our newest domain models that incorporate a lot of our learnings over the last 10 plus years of Stripe are launching. It's the place where we're sort of taking, like I said, using things like Account v2 so that we can simplify your integration. And of course, doing that with the same sort of reliability you expect, and increase performance where the new domain models are able to.
Nice. It's really nice to hear from a product manager, an engineer, not just about the features and the functions of the things they're building, which of course they have to be so wrapped up in, but to kind of step away and be like, these are the reasons why it's useful for you, the customer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the platform where we're trying to, like I said, incorporate some of the development practices that we wanted to introduce over the last years, but felt like it would have, to use some of the words earlier, breach a little bit of user trust to say well, yeah, we could change this, but if we do that, a bunch of small changes, over time, we'll feel like we'll cause our users a lot of pain to adopt these changes individually. So now, you're going to get a more modern developer experience. You're going to get sort of new semantics that we think, simplify integrations and are things that users would like to adopt, and now you can do so incrementally and at your own pace.
So you've been at Stripe for a little over 4 years, is that
almost,
right?
Yeah.
Stripe's gone through a lot of growth
Definitely
in that time. What's some of the Stripe principles that you would maybe recommend to a startup who's, let's say, to the platform team or a platform engineer of a startup?
There are kind of two that I think a lot about. One of them is sort of, I think, obvious, especially for a startup. Being pretty users first. I mean, like I said, I've talked a little bit about reliability. I've talked about the contract and what does it mean. It's not just enough to launch a new feature and the best API change you could do. It's, well, how does a user have to adopt that? What is the pain? Is it worth it? And at Stripe, we spend a lot of time thinking about API review and putting a lot of eyes on a change to make sure that we're comfortable with that set of expectations. And so, users first is something that definitely I think would resonate with most startups, but
Hope so, right?
I hope
Yeah.
so. But definitely is something that as you scale, especially at Stripe size, you have to spend a lot of time reiterating and thinking about. And it's something that I think is really fortunate that we put front and center for the design side. The other I would say is also I think resonates a little bit with startups, but more trade-offs, is being meticulous in your craft. I think, like I said, it's not just good enough to have the best idea. You have to really be thoughtful about closing all of the gaps around this brand new feature. It's not just enough to say, well, I've delivered this to the customer, but like I've delivered this to the customer and I need the API to support functionality, other functionality to sort of ensure a full featured experience. And again, thinking about processes like API review and some of the mechanisms we use to design those APIs, there's a lot of being meticulous and not just trying to get something out the door without thinking about the broader implications.
This is definitely a core, like the two things that you said are definitely core Stripe values. Recently I had a chat with Katie Dill, who's the head of design at Stripe, right? And I asked her a similar question about what would she recommend, what would the principles of Stripe should take away in terms of design. And she said almost exactly the same things, but from a design point of view, right?
Yes.
Being meticulous and intentional and being user first, user focus. Yeah. So it's so nice to hear like the same thing coming from like the other side of that partnership.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons Stripe works so well, especially from an API design standpoint and product design, is that everybody's really internalizing those same concepts. Especially when you scale and you talk about some of the change that we've gone through, even over the 4 years that I've been here. Those things have been really consistent, both from a leadership standpoint and from the day-to-day culture on the ground. So that's what makes it happen.
What's some of the evolution that you're excited about for the next couple of years?
There's a lot. I mean, it's Stripe scale. We're doing a lot of different things all at the same time. Anybody that was at Stripe sessions definitely saw a lot about AI and agentic interactions. I think, look, it's a pretty exciting time to be thinking about evolving an API and thinking about an API platform. And I think we're really trying to invest in that area and thinking about like, what are the right ways for an agent to interact with your Stripe account? We recently have a preview of mcp.stripe.com, trying to sort of suss out like, hey, look, we know what it looks like to launch a successful and large-scale API, but what does it look like to sort of cater to sort of this agentic flow? And that's pretty exciting. It's pretty novel. It's not like there's a paved path that you can look at somebody else.
Do you think that's the future then, more agentic?
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's going to replace the sort of block and tackle of, hey, look, here's what it means to have an API that allows integration to make a payment. But I do think being able to ensure you're able to meet your customers everywhere they are, where I think AI is going to be an increasing part of that story. And so, as one of the leads around how we do API design, like I think us thinking about in Stripe, how we bring that culture of meticulousness and users first and making it easy for teams to sort of support those AI use cases is going to be really important over the next couple of years.
What do you see as the evolution or the sort of the short-term next steps for the MCP at Stripe specifically?
Yeah, I think, even today we're thinking about like, what are the right tools that should be exposed? What are the right ways to like bring more of our API functionality to MCP? I think if you look at it today, with some intention, we've sort of got a limited set of tools that provide some of the functionality of Stripe. When you have an API around for 10 years, it accumulates a lot of configuration and ability to do a very powerful set of operations. I think the thing for us next is to really figure out like, how do we decide what subset of that functionality should really come to MCP? How do we decide if you're a team at Stripe and you're launching a new product, you've gone through this API process, how do we decide that should show up at MCP and sort of bring more capabilities to agentic flows?
So how do you expect people currently are using MCP with Stripe?
I think there's kind of really like 2 or 3 buckets.
Yeah.
One is, look, it's still a relatively nascent technology, and I think a lot of it is sort of, I don't want to call it, more than experimentation, but more like, well, how can I use one of our, an LLM or an agent, like a basic agent chat interface to be like, try to get and automate Stripe a little bit. How do I say, let me create a product, let me see what that looks like. And I would think of it more as that experimentation bucket. But I think we do see a lot more of these sort of agentic developer flows where, Stripe is all about our developers. And if our developers are adopting tools like IDEs that, allow you to do more code generation and interact with an agent. And I think that's the one that I am pretty excited about for thinking about when we think of MCP, like how do we cater to that user? How does a user ask their IDE to set up their Stripe account to run a unit test?
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful feature that is really hard to do without some sort of real thinking about that sort of agent interaction.
I have to say, I totally agree with that. Like the experimentation I've done with the Stripe MCP has all been IDE based, kind of using it as a knowledgeable like buddy to help me along on different steps. And it's got context, it's got memory around what you're asking it to do, kind of chain things together. But I don't know what the next bit is that where it ends? I'm sure it's not.
No, I think it goes even further where we really start to think about, again, we think a lot of our users in, how much are you, there's a lot of developers out there. There's ones that are incredibly sophisticated in their coding integration, and some that we would call maybe no code or less code. And I think one of the things that agents and agentic developer workflows really empowers is like someone to like be able to describe what they want to do and actually take that all the way from sort of their IDE to production. And I actually think one of the next steps when I think of like how agents may interact with Stripe is not just like, hey, set me up a payments integration and write the code for it. It's take it all the way through like how I host it, how I run it, make changes to my account to deal with some new product requirements that have come in, both in like my live integration and under my like sandbox or testing integration. And so I really think it's sort of like out of the IDE and into production, or at least into deployment.
But that's still as a tool as you're building, like to help you as you're building, rather than running with an application in production.
I do think, like I said,
MCP specifically.
Yeah, for MCP specifically, I think you can totally imagine a platform or an account using Stripe that provides some sort of agent that their customers interact with that may leverage MCP under the hood.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, if I think of like the next hop, it's more of the, it's a tool, or I guess let me say it this way. The place I'm most excited about in the short or medium term is about like making it so everyone from our most sophisticated developers to even our no-code developers can really take advantage of the knowledge of, say, an agent leveraging MCP to create a really sophisticated Stripe integration and leverage that expertise to run it at scale in production, not just build the app. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space.
Yeah, I think for me, the most exciting part of agentic AI is how we can bring in all of this knowledge and make it so much more accessible as we're building.
I do think if you go outside of the developer case, I do think we will see more, agents talking to agents and, trying to facilitate commerce and thinking about like, hey, I would like to buy something at Stripe and these kind of things. That I think today is not, when I think about where we need to think about what should show up in MCP, I think these are the kind of questions we're trying to figure out. Like what sort of actions should be available? Is it, block and tackle API calls, like creating a product? Or is it something even higher level of like, I'm trying to buy something from you, and is that an MCP call or is that something else? And I think the industry hasn't quite figured that out yet, but I think it's something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about.
These are definitely the questions, aren't they?
These are the questions that I think we will face from a developer platform standpoint. It's a whole different ballgame. We think of, it's not a developer just using an SDK, thinking about their IDE and writing some code it's a much larger set of considerations, and we have to kind of learn alongside the sort of industry as it evolves.
Where can our users, viewers go to learn more about API v2 and the developer platform?
On docs.stripe.com, we have both an overview of API v2, semantics around our API, sort of the basics of how to think about integrating and some of the developer platform cases.
And you can talk to the docs.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
We do have an AI assistant.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and you can ask it questions. There are even cases around like how do you want to, describing your Stripe integration or what you're trying to do, and getting pointers and bootstrapping some of your code.
Great. Well, Alex, thanks so much for coming in to chat to us today. I'll put some of those links in the description below.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.